don't we get started? We like to run these meetings punctually here at the school committee. Well, good. I'm Tony Mullen. I am the chair of the Westwood School Committee, and on behalf of the school committee and Superintendent of Parks, we'd like to welcome and thank you for coming. We are really pleased with all the attendance here tonight, and thank you for tonight. So just briefly, we are going to have about a presentation tonight for about the first 30 minutes that will go a bit over the process, where we are, what are the next steps, and how we're thinking about this project. Then we're going to go to breakouts for about 35 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have a wrap-up of about 15 minutes at the end. So we hope to end around 8:30 or so. Okay? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Superintendent of Parks and Maya Plotkin, who is the head of the School Building Committee.
Thank you, Tony. So as you said, I'm Emily Parks. I'm the superintendent of the Westwood Public Schools, and I want to thank you so much for coming out tonight for the kickoff for what I think is going to be a really interesting, hopefully fun community conversation over the next 8 months. And the message that I've been trying to get out to people, and I hope that you can spread to your friends and neighbors, is that the moment has really arrived here. We are about to dive right in, and the project isn't kind of theoretical anymore. We are about to have a lot of important conversations and be making some decisions over the course of this school year. So thank you for being part of it. As Tony said, we have an agenda tonight here. Maya and I are going to introduce you to the people we're going to be working with, our design team. We're going to do a very quick review of where we've been, why we're here, and then make sure people understand what the timeline and the process is going forward. And then we will break into some breakout sessions to do some thinking and to hear from folks who are here tonight. And we will summarize at the end. What I want to point out to you here is this last part of our agenda is an exit ticket. And I just want to preview the exit ticket for you. So there are 3 questions here. And after we wrap up tonight, we're just going to ask everyone who is here to answer a couple of questions. I tell you about it now so that you can kind of have these questions running in the back of your mind. You'll see that we will ask you what other questions do you have at the end of the evening. We want to get a sense if there are questions that have gone unanswered. Our intention is that we will collect those questions. We will answer them as best we can. If there are questions that at this stage of the process we don't yet have answers for, we will still have the questions, and hopefully we can give at least a sense of what the timeline would be for being able to answer them. And we're going to collect those FAQs and push them back out to the community. So that will be very helpful. The second thing that you'll notice on the exit ticket is we ask you if there are any other things that we should know about. And the reason we ask that is that tonight, we're really going to ask people to speak for yourselves. So we're interested in hearing what the people who are here tonight think, what they're excited about, what they're concerned about, what their questions are. But then at the end, on the exit slip, if you'd like to tell us what you're hearing other people say, feel free to do that then, okay? So we're going to kind of norm it that tonight's conversation is a real one among the people here, but then feel free to let us know what folks are saying when you're seeing them out and about in town, okay? So let me introduce Maya, who's going to introduce the design team.
Thanks, Emily. I just want to iterate what Emily and Tony said. We're very grateful you guys are here. We know there's a lot going on in town, but really this whole process for us, a major component is going to be about community feedback. And so thank you all for taking the time to come, and hopefully we will get you out of here by 8:30. So introducing the team. First, I'm going to start with our Owner's Project Manager, or our OPM. So if you think about it, these guys are like the quarterback for us. They are going to be helping us navigate on a number of fronts. On the MSBA front, which I think we've said before, is a very prescribed, very dense, complicated process. These guys know it inside and out. So they're going to help us who've really never been through of the process go through that. They're also going to help us with community outreach and also with the design and construction, basically start to finish. These are our guys, and this is Compass Project Management. Tim Bunfati and Chin Lee, if you guys want to give a wave. These guys have done so many MSBA school building projects, so we are really in good hands, and we're very excited to have them on board. Turning now to our architects, we have, so the architects were actually selected by the MSBA Design Review Panel, which is a panel of 15 people. We made up 3 of those seats. And Dorr and Whittier, we were very excited, came out on top. And that thrilled all of us on the school building committee. And these guys, similar to Compass, have done a lot of MSBA school buildings. You're going to see pictures tonight from a school in Needham that they recently completed. This school just opened in September. It's another elementary school, and it's beautiful. So we are very excited to have them on board. I'm going to introduce Don Walter from there. There you are, and he's going to walk through his team for now.
Thank you, Maya, and terrific turnout. So thank you all for coming. We're just thrilled to have the opportunity to work in Westwood. We've actually been doing public school design for 30 years as a firm, and we've been fortunate with the MSBA, who's been in operation for about 10 years, to either have completed or worked on 15 school projects, 8 of which are elementary school. So we have quite a bit of elementary experience that we're just so happy to share with you guys. I'm Don Walter, as Maya said, and I'm the principal in charge from our firm. What I do want to do is quickly introduce our team, and if they could stand up when I announce Rob Fitzgerald. He'll be our project manager, so that's our quarterback. And Giovanna Chasen, who is our interiors and fixtures, furnishings, and equipment person. Glenn Gallrad, who is our project architect, who will be working with Rob and primarily leading the design effort. And we got Jason Boone and Mike Perillo, who are our educational planners for within the firm. So this is the group that you'll be seeing throughout the entire process. And just want to emphasize that this building is not about us. This is about you and the community of Westwood. So we're hoping to provide to you a building that you'll all be proud of when we're all said and done. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. So now we're going to how did we get here? I think hopefully some of you in the room were involved about a year and a half ago when Emily and the school committee did a roadshow through Westwood and went through the reasons for why are we doing this project. So we talked about 3 schools, Hanlon, Deerfield, and Sheehan. As you can see, they're all very old. Built in the 1951, 53, and 1940. They all have space deficiencies for programming. They all need significant upgrades. Some of them have temporary modular classrooms. And the way the process worked, because the MSBA would only let us submit for 1 school, we couldn't submit for all 3 as much as we wanted to. We chose Hanlon. We determined that that would be in the most need, sort of have the most infrastructure work and programming challenges. So that's the school that got us in, and as a result, that's the school that we need to solve for the MSBA. 2 points I want to make here. First, as I mentioned, regardless of this project, we have infrastructure issues in all 3 of these schools that we need to address. So we have to do something. This project the MSBA process is a great way to address these infrastructure issues and receive reimbursement from the state. That's why, we're really pushing this project. But regardless, we have to do something. That's an important point to make. The second point I want to make is that these older buildings don't support modern educational programming. In the 50s, everyone sat in a line in a classroom and looked up at the teacher, and that's how they taught students. That's not what we do now. Now, the kids are in the classroom, in breakout groups, and they're doing work in maker spaces. So the way these schools were designed they're not functional for the way that our teachers are teaching our kids these days. So, what we have and what can be. So on the left, you can see the Hanlon Elementary School library. It was a former classroom, so it wasn't even a library. There's barely enough room for the books, let alone maker spaces, let alone places where kids can gather and be creative. On the right, this is the library from the elementary school that Doran Whittier just designed in Needham. You can see, it's a clear difference here. You can see there's so much room for the kids to get together. There's spaces, there's nooks, there's crannies, and there's, of course, lower bookshelves so you don't lose the kids in the stacks. So next, another example. So on the left is the Deerfield hallway. Again, the way we teach now is we teach in small groups. We pull kids out of class. We give specialized services. Deerfield was not set up for that. So we're teaching kids in hallways while other kids are walking by on their way to the bathroom. Again, not ideal. On the right, these are breakout spaces designed specifically exactly to do what we're trying to do in the hallway at Deerfield. And these are going to be located, these are located throughout the building. Great spaces where a teacher can pull out 2 or 3 kids and work, very closely with them. And that's, again, you can see the difference. Finally, we've got the Hanlon Elementary School cafeteria and the Carter Woodson Elementary. I should say this is a different elementary school. This was designed by VRBO architects. But I really don't know what to say here because the picture kind of speaks for itself. I'm not sure where you would rather eat, but I would rather eat on the right. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to talk about where we are and where we're going.
Thanks. Okay, so quickly, I just want to review how we got to this moment. So back in 2015, the Westwood School Committee commissioned what we call our Master Plan and Capital Needs Study. And so we commissioned a firm to come in, do an assessment of all of our facilities, and tell us what they thought. It's very clear from that report that there are significant issues in these buildings that need to be addressed. And so as a result of that process, we started down a road of thinking strategically and starting to plan for how we were going to address those issues. You can see there's kind of a gap here after that study, and we started down a road, and I refer to this as the misstep. So we realized at some point that we needed to slow down, that it was going to be very important to engage the community in this process in a deliberate way. We also, in that time, learned a lot more about the MSBA process and got some advice about how to approach that process. And we ultimately kind of hit reset and said, all right, let's regroup. And we decided to apply to the MSBA in the spring of 2017. It's something that's called the Statement of Interest. So you let them know we're interested in working with you. I have to be honest, the experience of other school districts, other superintendents I've spoken to, is that you have to apply many times to get into the process. And so we were pleasantly surprised that we were accepted on our first application. That's pretty unusual. So that's good news and bad news. Good news that we're in, kind of bad news that apparently our needs seem significant enough that we got in on the first try. But there we were, so we're off and running. We got accepted in December 2017 into what they call eligibility, where a whole bunch of things happen to sort of assess the readiness of the community. So you may remember that between December 2017 and the town meeting in May of 2018, we had a major push around community engagement. So we did lots of community forums, we did tours of our building, et cetera, et cetera. We wanted to make sure the community was well informed and educated about what the needs are to understand why we were asking the community to consider making this significant investment in the future of the schools. And I will speak for myself. I was pretty thrilled at the May town meeting how overwhelmingly residents supported funding the next phase of the project. I feel like we got a clear signal to move ahead. And so at that town meeting, residents agreed to fund the next phase with the MSBA, which is called the Feasibility Study. So with that, we formed a school building committee, which is one of the MSBA requirements. And we proceeded to do a bunch of things that we needed to do for them, which got us to February when the MSBA officially voted us into their feasibility study phase. That's where we are now. Having gotten over that hurdle, we have spent the last few months going through the procurement processes to hire the OPM, who you just met, and to hire the architect. So that's where we are today, at the end of this timeline. So what's going to happen now? So you can see here we are in October 2019, and we are beginning a several-month process of talking with residents and also educators to understand what's important to people, to understand our vision for the future for the Westwood Public Schools. And I'm going to say more about some of these things in a minute, but we're going to go through this process between now and March. By the time we get to the end of March, based on that process and some work that our design team is going to do, we will whittle down some of the options to a short list of potential projects. So that would be by March. And then between March and June, we will need to get more feedback and input about that narrow short list of options, because by the end of June, the school building committee will take a vote and will submit to the MSBA one project option and say, this is the one that we want to move forward with. So by the end of this school year, we will know what we are planning to move forward with for the project. Okay, so that's kind of the timeline, and I get asked a lot, like, when will we know? That's the answer, the end of this school year. We'll be kind of waiting around for MSBA to do some things during the summer, which works well, because a lot of folks aren't here in the summer, so we will then hopefully get MSBA approval of that one option by the end of August. And that allows the design team to really get going with what's called schematic design. That gets the project designed about 30% out. And that's because by the spring of 2021, not this spring, as I've heard some people say, not this spring, next spring, 2021, at town meeting, we would be going to the voters to say, this is the project. Here's what we believe it'll cost, and we also know at that point how much the MSBA is willing to reimburse. So we'll have all of that information as a community, and then the vote is really a yes/no, whether or not we will fund it and move forward or not. Okay? So I'll think optimistically for a second and assume that it passes, and at that point, you can see here, we would begin construction. And the timeline at this point, fingers crossed, is that we would be ready to open a school in the fall of 2023. That's the timeline at this point. So at some level, it's a little long, but I actually think it's going to feel kind of quick at this point, because there are a lot of things that we need to do in that period of time. So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the steps on the timeline. So I said between now and March 2020, we're in this period of community input and visioning. The MSBA has a name for this phase. They call it the Preliminary Design Program. there are sort of parallel things happening. So the design team has to look at a bunch of kind of technical things around facilities. So they've got to do an assessment of existing sites, looking at the state of the buildings. You can see here, bulleted, all these things have to be considered, right? So a lot of things to take a look at. At the same time that we're doing kind of this technical work, assessing various things, we also need to be thinking about some educational questions. How do we use our space? What is our vision for teaching and learning? And so throughout this, we'll be doing things like tonight, listening sessions, visioning sessions, working with principals, meeting with faculty, getting community feedback. That takes us to the short list of options. After that, we have this next phase between May and June. The MSBA calls that the preferred schematic report. So here, it's like a funnel. We're kind of narrowing our options. We're saying we've got all this information. We know what our vision is. We've created a roadmap for what's important to us. And we start using that as criteria to think about which options make the most sense. And so we winnow those down. We have our short list. We take a look at those options. We start to compare. We look at the pros and cons. We look at the cost. And by the end of June, we select the option that we think best fits the criteria that we've set out as a community. Then we begin schematic design, so that's between August and February. We have to do a lot of this initial design work because that allows us as a community to understand what kind of investment it will take. What would the cost of this project be? What can we expect in terms of the reimbursement from MSBA? And that allows us to do the funding vote. Okay, so that's the process. So this process is called the Feasibility Study. And at this point, there are 3 major options to be considered, to be studied in the feasibility study. I mentioned that between the town meeting when we funded the feasibility study and sort of now, we had to produce some deliverables for the MSBA. We had some meetings with them. We gave them a lot of information about what's important to us. They took a lot of information. They have folks there who do demographic studies, who do enrollment projections. They look at what's happening with real estate and housing developments and all those things. And so based on that work, we had to go through a process where we agreed what major things we would study in the feasibility study. So here's what's on the table at this point. We'll take a look at what would it mean if we only addressed Hanlon. And you'll see that there are different options to be studied within that one bucket, right? So we could renovate the existing Hanlon. We could renovate and add to the existing Hanlon. Or we could just build a brand new Hanlon and raise the current building. So in the feasibility study, you have to look at every one of those iterations. The other big bucket is to think about consolidation, to say, well, we could put together Hanlon and Deerfield. And when the MSBA looked at our current enrollment and looked at our enrollment projections 10 years out, they said, if you do that, we'd be willing, we'd sort of be in terms of funding for a building up to 560 students, because that would take care of Hanlon and Deerfield, and it would also allow the community to accommodate future expected growth. So we're building for the future here, right? We want to make sure that if we build a building, it's still going to work for us later on, right? That it has that kind of capacity. And again, we could think about add reno, we could think about new. And then the third option is to look at consolidating Hanlon and Sheehan. And in that case, the design enrollment would be 685 students. The population at Sheehan the current capacity of Sheehan is bigger, right? So that's what that would be, and there are different iterations. What you'll notice here is that because we submitted for Hanlon, anything we do has to involve Hanlon. That's how we got into the program. So that is what has to happen with the MSBA. But having gotten in and accepted for Hanlon, we said, you know, we have these other needs and we'd like to talk about that too, because maybe we could address more than one need at this time. And so through that process, the MSBA said, yes, we could imagine contributing to projects of this scope. I sometimes get asked, is one of the options to combine all three, to combine Hanlon, Deerfield, and Sheehan? And the answer to that is no, that is not one of the options on the table. So we're in this process with the state so that we could get potentially very significant reimbursement. And a building that big, forgetting the pros and cons of whether or not we'd want to do that for a second, but a building of that size is beyond the scope of what the MSBA was willing to invest in, okay? So at this point, it's just not one of the options. The other thing that may not be apparent here is that though the ultimate option does have to include Hanlon in some way, it doesn't have to be at the Hanlon site. So the MSBA doesn't care at the end of the day where Hanlon is located. So that's another thing in the feasibility study that has to be looked at. So, you know, you could have a combined, for example, hypothetically, you could have a combined Hanlon and Sheehan. It could be at Hanlon or it could be at Sheehan. And so we need to look at all the pros and cons of all of those options and understand them in order to figure out what the plan is, okay? So there's a lot of studying and thinking to be done at this point. And I'm going to turn it over now to members of our design team because they're going to talk just a little bit about how do we do this? How do we do this process?
Thanks, thanks, Emily. So when we think about evaluation criteria, there's a lot of considerations evaluating options like this. So outlined here are a number of questions that we've come up with to help kind of spur on some of those criteria. Does it support the educational goals, including student health and wellness? What is the best location on site? Which best supports the community use? What's the impact on busing and traffic in each of the different options? What are the costs and the value added versus the value added to students and community of each of those options that we look at? And which is the least disruptive to students in construction? We know that there's more questions in this, but these is just some of the ones that we came up with to help spur on the discussion. So sitting back for a minute and we look at the big picture, we see three separate buckets or topics of discussion. One is what happens to the remaining schools? The other is what about the students and community? How are those affected by each option? And how are the logistics? So we'll just kind of quickly walk through some ideas on each one of these. So how do students get distributed among each of the schools? What's the future use of any existing school building that gets remained? When we think about the students and community, you know, what are the things that matter most to students and community members? So, in part of that is, you know, setting up these listening sessions, like Emily mentioned, one of which tonight is to hear from you exactly what is most important to you and what impact you are feeling or potentially might feel through the process of going through one of these. And then logistics, we'll be meeting with the administrators of each of the schools and talking about what's the impact of staffing, what about other resources, transportation, extended day program. All of these things we'd like to hear and listen from the community and the school district, and that's really part of the study. So how do we integrate your vision and educational program into the design process? I'm going to pass this off to Mike, and he'll walk you through this process.
So as Emily and Rob were talking about, throughout this feasibility study process, throughout these months, we're going to have a number of options. So where do those options come from? they come essentially from the educational program. But one of the things in our office, the strong beliefs that we have is that education drives design. And so we are going to, starting tonight, understand the community's vision and the school's vision, the staff's vision for what is education now, what is education in the future. So that way we can design a building that supports the educational program now, but it's flexible enough so that it can continue to evolve with education. So we look at the current educational program, some goals and objectives that the district may have in the future, and that kind of frames the project for us. It develops things called guiding principles, and those guiding principles are what we weigh all of these options on. You'll see this is just some of the imagery from work that we've done in the past. The district already has 2 evening sessions set to discuss education, and then we'll also be doing some work during the daytime with staff as well. But you'll see that this is a completely collaborative process. Students are involved, staff's involved. Over here, this is a current project we're working on in Gloucester, and the 2 elementary school principals were moving pieces and parts around to figure out what were the idealized spaces and how they'd be connected to really create the most optimal experience for kids. Throughout our process, we did some early research on the district, and we found out that because of the strategic plan and many of the things already in place and happening into the future, that there are already some guiding principles that we found. And Giovanna's going to talk about how those guiding principles connect to some of the design elements that we could work through.
All right, I'm not a microphone person, but I'll do my best. So as an interior designer, I have, I think, the most fun job. So I get to take all this information that we're collecting now, and I get to transform it into physical space. Everything that we come up with in this early phase informs everything up until the furniture that we order. So from the finishes to the spaces. And so some of the early guiding principles that we saw from our research will show you a little bit of what that could maybe look like in physical space. So we talk about coding and maker spaces. I think historically we thought students will go to a computer lab. That's changing now. Technology is coming to students. Coding is coming to the classroom, and it's as young as pre-K and K. So bringing all of that and making it accessible to younger students. We talk about student-centered learning. This is giving a student the opportunity to control their environment, both indoors and outdoors. You live in a beautiful setting. We want to really take advantage of outdoor classrooms and really put the student a little bit more in the driver's seat and let them figure out what works for them. Not every student is the same. I have 2 kids, same DNA, completely different humans. I don't know how it happens, but it does. Play, so important. Students are being exposed to a lot more serious stuff outside of school. So we really believe while they're at school, let's let them be kids, and the importance of play is key. Our landscape architect couldn't be here today, but she really does a lot with community visioning on play spaces and outdoor spaces. So there will be sessions on that as well. And then breakout spaces, we talked a little bit about how currently students are working in the hallway. We want to create spaces that are destinations for lots of different activities to happen. It could be a small group, a teacher working with 1 or 2 students, or maybe it's where a special reader comes in and reads a story, or creating spaces where students can kind of tuck away and read a book and be a little bit more independent. Again, this is happening indoors and out. And then just flexibility in lesson implementation. Again, this is putting a little bit more control into the hands of the student and the educator, just so it's not everybody's in a row, looking at the screen, doing the same thing every day, but throughout the day, spaces can change and adapt. So these are, again, just ideas and how they manifest into space. We're really excited to start this journey with you. And Jason, I believe? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Before we get to the breakout activity, I want to tell a quick story about myself, mostly because Giovanna got to. I actually started this profession where you are. I was a high school math teacher And as a sort of a young rogue professional, I was invited to sit on the building committee and participate in designing and constructing a new high school in my community. So I know from that learning experience that this can be scary, can be emotional, right? Of all the topics you can have a conversation with someone, education runs really deep. So we know how important this is. And the design team in the district is really interested to know what's important to you. So in order to get into this interactive activity, we'd like everybody to get up and move to one of these, tables around the room, and please try to sit with someone that you didn't come with. Once you get at the tables, I'll give the instructions and we'll start the activity. It looks like most people are settled. As Superintendent Parks said earlier, as she foreshadowed for us, the nature of this activity is both a group one and an individual one. For the responses we're going to ask you to put on the wall under each of these 4 guiding questions, we want those responses to be as individuals. In order to start that process, however, we'd like you to think quietly on your own, write some thought down on the Post-it notes, and then have a conversation at your table. After the conversation at your table, I would encourage you to write some more things down, and then we'll post them on the wall. So let me tell you what the questions are trying to get at. Mike and Giovanna shared with you that designing a school today is very different than designing a school when this building, when Hanlon, when Sheehan, when Deerfield were designed. Basically only asked 2 questions. How many students do you have, and how many of them do you want in each room? We ask a lot more questions these days, right? We know a lot more about the neuroscience of learning, the social science in learning. We know a lot more about student needs. So this first question, I want you to respond to what excites you about the idea of having a new school. And it can run the gamut of whatever you think is an appropriate response to that, from I can't wait to have a new playground. I'm really excited about a new gym. I'm really excited about breakout, whatever it is, right? What excites you about the prospect for the project? Second, Superintendent Parks spoke about the process in terms of what its sequence is, but we want to know how you would define a successful process. Things we typically hear. We'd like it to be inclusive. We want our voices heard. We'd like a process that includes renovation. We want the most cost-effective solution. We want to make sure that all of the options are explored. So we want to hear from you what you think about a successful process. Things this project should consider. Giovanna mentioned play. There's actually a lot of work going on right now in research about the pedagogy of play and how it should factor into the educational experience. And so a feature that might result in is something like we saw in the Sunita Williams project, where we're actually reading structures inside the building. In their case, they can double as play space in inclement weather. So there may be any number of features that's important to you that you'd like this project to consider. And then finally, as Superintendent Parks said, what other concerns do you have? Questions do you have about the process, about the project, about what's going on here in Westwood? So again, what we're going to do for this activity, take about 5 or 6 minutes and ponder these questions for yourselves quietly and jot a few notes down on the Post-it notes. I'll alert you when that time is up, and then we want you to have a conversation about these 4 questions at your tables. I'll alert you again, and then we'll take all of your responses and we'll post them up on the wall and give a chance for everybody to read them after a few minutes. Questions about what we're going to do or what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so 5 or 6 minutes, think to yourself first, write down some early thoughts, and then I'll alert you and want you to have a tabletop discussion. Okay, in the interest of time, let's talk about what's up there. Can I get everybody's attention, please? I want to quickly walk through each of the 4 prompts and try to say something about what's on the wall. Did everyone have a chance to go up and sort of read what your community members wrote? I think there's too much on the wall to try to synthesize it in one concise statement, but I'm going to try to pick up some of the highlights. For example, on what are you most excited about? I think the general theme is a new something, right? We know we've got old buildings. We're excited about intentionally purpose-built something to serve the students in this community. Is that a sort of a fair capturing of what people saw on this sheet? I'm going to come back to that one. A lot of concerns, right? I mean, there are huge decisions to be made here, right? We have a consolidation, a potential consolidation project. We have financial implications. We have traffic implications. We have educational implications. So all of those concerns are raised on here. Everything from, what happens to redistricting to what about getting across town? Right? So what I can say about this sort of in general terms is there's not anything up there that we haven't seen before, right? And if we do the process right, we'll work through all of those concerns together over the next several months. In terms of features, some really interesting ones on here. The idea of play as part of an educational feature. A lot of people mentioned fields. I want to outdoor classroom spaces. So some of the things that Mike and Giovanna highlighted in the presentation made their way on here. It's sort of consistent with that theme over there in the left-hand question of excitement about just a new purpose-built place. And then finally over here, I think the general theme was inclusivity and impacting the greatest number of students possible. So with that sort of quick summary, what we're going to do with these is we're going to photograph them tonight. As Superintendent Parks mentioned, we're going to capture all of the questions, all of the comments, and report back to you on what's up here on the wall. Before I turn this back over to the superintendent, we intentionally didn't give folks a chance to ask questions during the presentation, but we want to give you a few minutes now to ask a few questions, and we'll pass the microphone around as answers seem appropriate. So are there any specific questions that anyone would like to ask, either about the presentation or about something that showed up on the wall back there? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Deerfield District. Can you provide some context to what the contribution and or the reimbursement would be for the MSBA? And the reason I ask that is because with these types of programs, they can of course be extremely helpful, but this is a very dynamic situation where we have multiple elementary schools around town, all in a very similar situation. And it's not like we're just replacing a elementary school where we're looking at the scope of many. So I'm just curious to know what the impact that program is having, and then how is that potentially handicapping this process where we might be able to, I just want to understand what it is doing so that we can think about, like, could we do differently if we were not playing within the scope of this program? Does that make sense?
There was a lot in there. Let me see if I can unpack that a little bit. Is the question about how can the MSBA money be applied and how is it?
How is that program impacting this decision? Because we're essentially funneling this all into very specific areas where we have a broader situation to solve. So I want to know, this government program, although they are mostly helpful, this is not like replacing a Needham elementary school. We're thinking about many schools around our town. There's a lot of implications around that. So what are the contributions from the reimbursement standpoint that you're speaking to? I want to know the context of that. And then how is that potentially handicapping the scope of this project as a whole?
So Tim or Chin, do you guys want to handle the reimbursement question?
In terms of the impact on reimbursement, we don't know yet until we get through more of this process to know exactly what the impact on reimbursement. I think what I'm gleaning from what you're saying is, by being in the process, does it lead us in a certain direction or another direction? Is that sort of where you're getting at? Because we're part of the MSBA?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think this town has the resources to think more innovative than being funneled in a certain direction by a state program. So I just want to understand what the state program is driving all of you very talented people towards, so that we as a town can think about, are those resources, because it's a state program, the best for this town? Because we have a very unique situation of multiple elementary schools around town versus a town that might have an elementary school in a section that needs to be replaced, right?
Right.
Because there's a lot of other schools that are potentially, like, we could do a big project, and then there's other schools that are not addressed.
We have to study the scenarios that Superintendent Parks laid out. Those are the scenarios that's where the MSBA sort of is defining where we have to go with our study. In terms of the impact on what districts or how the districts would look like, depending on those scenarios, they're going to look to the town to make that decision. That's not going to be something that they that they're going to be particularly, they're going to want to make sure it's supported, but they're not going to try to insert themselves in that. So the extent we have a requirement to follow their plan, it's to study those scenarios.
I just want to say one thing, to the extent that I can be reassuring. I mean, I really believe that working with the MSBA is the right thing to do. It is what communities do in terms of their school buildings. I mean, the other alternative is to fund something entirely locally, and some communities do that. They usually do it because they can't get in with MSBA, right? So I hear from a lot of school districts that say, we've applied and we haven't gotten in, and at this point, we just got to go forward with all local funding. So, I think we stand to get a significant amount of money from the state. They're only going to reimburse for certain things up to certain parameters. Local communities, though, get to make the decisions about what goes into the design and what you want, with the following caveat: they'll reimburse up to and within some kind of parameter. And then if you say, and we'd also like this thing, they're going to say, fine, it's just that part won't count in the reimbursement if you choose to do something sort of beyond their standards. So I think what I'm hearing you say, but maybe I'm wrong, is that you're concerned that maybe we're making decisions that somehow is being driven by an external force, and I don't believe that is the case. I think we're really in the driver's seat. And actually, I would say, I think we're going to benefit from the experience of the MSBA. They really know how to build schools, and they've been fantastic to work with so far. They've really listened to us. I think they understand what our needs are. So I don't know if I can reassure you, but that is what I think. Got it. Okay. sorry if I went field there. Yeah, so Josepha is saying that maybe the concern is we have 3 elementary buildings that are in need, right? And that we're now on a track to solve, if you will, for 2, potentially, if we were to consolidate. And what about the remaining school? Is that the question?
No, I mean, that's a tiny piece of a bigger scope question.
Okay. Well, and
Just to clarify that, I think what he's saying is actually a similar concern I have. Is that
Can we, excuse me, this is process. Can we use the microphone?
oh yeah, sorry.
Process, please, we gotta be recorded for television.
yeah, here we go. All right, it's my moment to shine. All right, my name and address. Okay, my name is Nathan Machado, and I live near the Sheehan School. Just in case some of you guys don't like my comment, but but all I'm saying is I think I understand what you're saying in that the concern is that if we looked at 3 scenarios, right, that seem to be maybe already prepackaged and and I think someone even said these scenarios are how the MSBA are going to we feel they will feel better about this because it's going to yield more student impact or whatever, right? In that if we have already kind of ex ante this analysis, right, funneled down into these scenarios, I think that's the concern that I hear, and it's actually one that I have as well, is that got it that it's like taking on a bad investor, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, do we understand there's a good pot of money there, but is it really the right answer? Are we already forcing ourselves into deciding between 3 scenarios that may not be the most optimal scenarios for what we're trying to solve for? I think that's what I heard you say, and I tend to agree with that. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, saying that to me that's a concern, and I want to understand that better. And I think that's what I heard you say.
Sure, and it's hard to be able to make a decision one way or the other if we don't know what SBA is going to do. Right?
Yeah.
Well, what MSBA will contribute will be revealed throughout the process, right? As we've all identified, there are a whole host of analyses that we have to perform and design explorations we have to perform and questions we have to ask you guys that may impact what the MSBA reimburses for and doesn't reimburse for. What we do know is that our point of departure is the 3 things that the MSBA has agreed for us to study. If something new comes out of that, we can always tell the MSBA that something new came out of it. Right now, that's everybody's understanding is that those sort of 3 basic scenarios is what's being explored as part of the project. Other questions?
I think,
Oh, yeah.
Can I just make one more point on this? We came up with these options ourselves. I want to make it clear, the MSBA did not come up with these options. We have 3 schools, and we submitted for Hanlon, and if I'm giving an example. Let's say we consolidate Hanlon and Deerfield. The MSBA will contribute to that solution. We still have Sheehan. The great thing about this process is that because we're looking at these 3 options, we will know the cost of what the renovating Sheehan would be. So if we as a town decide, you know what, we're not only going to fund a new school at Hanlon and Deerfield, we also want to renovate Sheehan, we can certainly put that to the town and see if the town will do that. So the reason that these 3 options are up there is because if you drill down into them, each one of these options will provide as much information about each school as we can get out of them. And hopefully from all of that information, we can make the best decision for the town. And ultimately, it's up to you guys what you're going to fund. All we can really do is say, this is what we recommend, this is how much it's gonna cost. And at the end of the day, it's up to the town of Westwood to see what they're willing to fund. But the MSBA is a chance to get a portion of that project reimbursed, whatever the final project is. It's not the only thing we have to do. We can also go out and locally fund a solution to the other school that's left behind, if that makes sense. So a lot of these questions we don't to at this time because we haven't started the feasibility. I think once we get into the feasibility process and we start understanding what are the conditions of these schools, what are these, what are the challenges that we have, we will know more. And as we're narrowing down, then yes, we are running that in. We're just naturally running it in parallel because we are looking at these these different options, and we are saying, okay, well, if this is the preferred option, why is it the preferred option? Because this is too expensive. You know, that kind of thing. So I think as a natural part of the process, we will be running these questions in tandem. But I've never done this before, so I'm hoping that's what we get out of it.
Exactly the kind of, feedback and insight that the community, that the district is looking for. Can you remember to tell your name and your address, please?
Al Fusco with the district on Pine Lane. I think what I've heard here, I'm aligned with these questions, and I see a lot of people nodding. So I think the ask is that this project include a longer-range plan that addresses all the other elementary schools, because what you showed was the modern learning environment, which will not exist at the Martha Jones, will not exist at the Downey, right? And so to come out of the other end of this project with just a new school, right, without addressing the rest of the schools is kind of like leaves an empty feeling. So I think the plan should be all-encompassing, and then obviously financially it needs to be time planned.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, and I want to say these are the kinds of conversations that we're having internally as well. So, I mean, the vision we have for education in Westwood is for the whole district. You know, we're talking about what we want teaching and learning to look like in all of our elementary buildings. We're very attuned to that issue of parity, and we understand that thinking about facilities is sort of a long-term and ongoing process. And as Maya said, part of the feasibility study is to gather a whole bunch of information so that we can be clear as a community about what the overall plan is, what the timeline would be. It may not, I just want to be clear, what I was presenting as the options has to do with sort of the MSBA portion of the project, but absolutely, we have needs beyond just 2 buildings, and we need to be thinking about that as well. We're very aware of that, so thank you for that comment.
Are there other questions that aren't about parity?
Yeah, hello. Hi, David Warshay, president of Chase Estates off Winter Street there. I do have a quick question about the overriding goal, which I think is to take out all 3 school buildings and maybe being creative about it. The question is, can we do it by building 2 large buildings and then shift the remaining just whichever school, break it into, send some kids to Deerfield, send some to Downey, based on, on the busing, and then just take out all 3 schools, which are all in bad shape. Is that, more creative, sort of a one and done solution, out there, or take, or build a campus on the Hanlon site there with 2 buildings and design it to be a 3rd added if we could get funding, on that.
As I understand it, you're suggesting could we consolidate from 5 neighborhood schools to 3? Right. So within the parameters of the MSBA process, the only way that you could do that, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, folks, is that they would only reimburse for a certain portion of it, and then other things would be locally funded. My sense, but this would be great to get some community feedback. As we went through that process leading up to the feasibility study, I heard a lot from people about how much they value their neighborhood schools in Westwood. I would say that that was kind of an overarching theme that I heard. And my sense in some of those preliminary discussions was that what it would take to consolidate in the way that you're suggesting, to take 3 schools offline, build a school, that would be an elementary school for probably 950 students. And the sense that I've gotten from parents is that that's a elementary school that they think is large. That's what I've heard. But, on your exit slip, if you think that's something we should consider, I'm interested in hearing about that. But I have found that to be a very common sentiment.
We want to be sensitive to time, but I don't want to ignore this side of the room. Are there any questions over here that are burning on people's minds? Yeah, you got one over there.
Hi, Seth Frederickson, Sheehan. So in the process, we go from 3 options. I assume to some degree, these options explode a little bit as we get in the design process, and then we go to the short list of options. The next step was that somebody picks one, and that goes to the MSBA for approval. Who picks that one option to submit to the MSBA?
Can I actually start that, Superintendent? So just to be clear about the options and the whittling down process, the three things that we showed on the wall, the three enrollments, are just the buckets of scenarios. So that first exploration of options is actually going to be something more like 20 or 25 different versions of those three scenarios. So we'll whittle down from the many to the few in the first step. And there are often iterations of even those few. So if you whittle down to 3, then maybe you end up with 4 or 5 or 6, in variation, and then ultimately you pick the one.
So yes, so we'll do that process, and the way we've set up the timeline is, of course, there'll be opportunities for community feedback and reaction to the various options that are out there. But ultimately what happens is that the school building committee, which is a group of about, I think it's like 19 people, the membership is posted on our website. It includes the whole school committee, many people from the school department, someone from the select board, some town officials, permanent building committee members, residents. That group is charged with voting, taking a vote and determining what to submit ultimately as the project.
But is it fair to say that that vote will not take place in isolation, that there'll be significant community input leading up to that?
That is absolutely fair to say. So that's why in part why we're doing this 8-month process, because the school building committee is committed to understanding what's important to the town and implementing a solution that makes the most sense.
Great.
Okay, great. Well, this has been great. So obviously this is just the beginning of a longer conversation, but I want to ask people to really stay connected. And we have on our school district website, if you go to the homepage of the website, there's a big yellow button that says learn more about the elementary building project. We've actually had this web page up from the very beginning. So if you feel like there are questions that you have that you kind of want to catch up on, you can go to this web page and see all of the communication that we've done since the very beginning. If you're interested in that capital needs master planning study, not light reading, but it's all posted there. If you missed the building tours, the Westwood Media Center filmed them when we did those open houses, so you can get a glimpse inside the buildings. Everything, all of the things that we've submitted to MSBA, they're posted. And we update this website in real time. So the presentation from tonight will be on there by tomorrow. So please stay involved. And I also have Westwood Media Center's logo up here. They are filming this tonight. They film all of our school committee meetings, our school building committee meetings. We're having conversations about this process. Those meetings, if you're welcome to come, of course. And then the videos are all posted on the Westwood Media Center website and also on our school department website. So lots of ways to stay connected and be involved. Well, this is the elementary building project page, so I've already clicked the yellow button to get here. But if you go on our home page, you kind of can't miss it. It's giant and yellow, and it says click here. And if you click that button, it will take you right here to this page, okay? So thank you once again for being here, and I encourage folks to keep coming out and tell your friends and neighbors. We're repeating this agenda on November 4th for people who couldn't be here, and then we'll have more to come. And just leave your exit tickets right on the table and we'll come get them. Thank you.